The real national failure was the way we conceived and viewed Hamas as a terrorist organization and as an adversary. And we believed, and I purposely, intentionally used the term we, because I think that it was the entire country for the most part. We all believed in this idea that a terrorist group, genocidal, sitting on our southern border, declaring openly and publicly that they want to eliminate the state of Israel and kill Jews. We said, no, you don't. You just want money. No, you don't. You just want economic prosperity. In other words, there was something else here at play that created what we call the policy of containment, created this fairy tale of an idea that we could live and exist alongside this terrorist organization. And that blew up.
Yaakov Katz is the co-author of the book While Israel Slept, which he wrote with Amir Bobot. And Yaakov recently served as the editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post. He is an experienced journalist, prolific writer, and highly regarded military and defense expert. Yaakov, welcome to the Australian Jewish News podcast, Conversations That Count, and congratulations on the release of your brilliant new book, While Israel Slept.
Thank you so much. It's great to be with you, Anna.
It's our pleasure. Can you explain to our listeners, just before we get stuck into stuff, in a broad brushstroke sense, who is responsible for the defense of the Gaza border and who was responsible on the 7th of October?
That's a great question. In practice or in reality, the entity or the institution that's responsible is the IDF, is the Israel Defense Forces. They are the ones who are deployed along the border. Their soldiers, their units, their commanders are the ones who are that first line of defense always when it comes to border security and the military security of this country. But if you go a little deeper, obviously there are other intelligence agencies that also carry with it some weight of responsibility for example, providing a warning of a potential invasion or war that might be coming. So it's a little more complex, but definitely that line of defense is the Israeli military itself.
And who fundamentally makes decisions in regards to the security of that border? Is it a political decision or is it a military decision, or do they work together?
So it's, again, another good question that a lot of people tend to skip over is it's a mix. It's a mixed bag, I would say. In other words, the military in this country, unlike, let's say, the United States, where you have the commander-in-chief as the president, and then he can directly give orders to the U.S. Armed Forces. In this country, in Israel, the military is subordinate to the government of Israel, which basically means to the cabinet of Israel. Now, the cabinet of Israel in its full form, which could be anywhere from 30 to 40 ministers, could then give over its authority to what's called the security cabinet. So the security cabinet can then have the authority, a smaller body, but also made up of ministers. The prime minister himself, in this case, Benjamin Netanyahu, cannot just give an order to the military, go do X, Y, or Z. It needs to have the approval of the security cabinet. But there are decisions that, for example, fall under the purview of the IDF chief of staff. So, for example, border security. How many troops do I want to have along a border? How many units do I want to have? How many tanks do I want to have? That's not something the cabinet would get into the detail of. So it would say, you're the commander of the military, you're the chief of staff, this is your responsibility, you make those decisions. The cabinet will make the bigger policy decisions.
Okay, so it's complicated and there's many departments, I presume, that are involved, and a lot of bureaucracy and layers to it. So in your wonderful book, which you've really dug deep and researched so thoroughly, you've spoken to obviously many people, and the main takeaways in your mind are there three maybe mistakes that were made prior to the 7th of October that really stand out to you?
Well, it's a tough question, because I think that the way I've come to look at this and what happened on the 7th of October is that it is a national failure. right? It's not someone who I can point a finger at and say, you made the mistake. In other words, I could say, the IDF chief of staff on the night between the October 6th and October 7th misread the intelligence together with his other commanders, and they didn't see what was happening before their eyes. And we go into great detail in the book of what transpired that night and how there were alarm bells that were ringing and there were signs that Hamas was planning something, but it was all just misinterpreted. It fell more on the side of this is possibly a drill than on the side of this being an attack by Hamas. So I could say that was the mistake. I could say that the mistake was the way the IDF had deployed along the border. So, but I look at those and I tend to think that those are more tactical. In other words, yes, it was a massive intelligence failure. It was a massive defensive failure. But the real national failure was the way we conceived and viewed Hamas as a terrorist organization and as an adversary. And we believed, and I purposely, intentionally used the term we, because I think that it was the entire country for the most part. And of course, there were outliers. But you look at consecutive prime ministers, consecutive defense ministers, consecutive chiefs of staff, consecutive heads of military intelligence. I look at myself as a longtime journalist who's been covering these issues as well. We all believed in this idea that a terrorist group, genocidal, sitting on our southern border, declaring openly and publicly that they want to eliminate the state of Israel and kill Jews. We said, no, you don't. You just want money. No, you don't. You just want economic prosperity. In other words, there was something else here at play that created what we call the policy of containment, created this fairy tale of an idea that we could live and exist alongside this terrorist organization. And that blew up on the morning of October 7th at 6:29 when the attack commenced. And therefore, I think really to understand what happened, and this is what we tried to do in the book, was to go back in time almost to the founding of Hamas and to when this group was created, and then go through the decades since and try to understand when this policy was created, when it incubated, how it got formulated, and at what point did it just become the conventional thinking and wisdom of the entire state of Israel almost.
When do you believe it actually started? Is this what is called the conceptia?
This is what the conceptia is, yes.
So the conceptia is really a hypothetical philosophy, let's say, or a philosophy towards the Hamas, or I don't know, how do you describe it more?
I call it, Anna, a fairy tale, because that's really what it is. It's believing in something that's not real. It's a fantasy. Now, it's easy for us to say that today after the attack took place, because had we spoken on October 5th or October 6th, 2023, I probably would have said to you, it's working, right? Things are quiet. Yes, there are occasional escalations and occasional clashes and skirmishes, but for the most part, things are quiet. And, the money keeps flowing to Gaza. Hamas doesn't seem to want an all-out war. And that was the prevalent assessment within all the intelligence agencies. It was why, for example, and, this is why a lot of people, I'll just take a step back for a moment. A lot of people have difficulty understanding how is it possible that Israel's a country that is so vigilant when it comes to its military challenges and threats, right? In other words, if we were to look at the world today, there aren't many countries like Israel that everyone is so hyper vigilant and aware of matters of security and military. So how is it that this country fell asleep to such an extent? And I think that what it was really was we believed so much in this idea, in the so-called conceptia, that everything that happened was looked at through the prism of the conceptia. And therefore, even when, on the night of October 6th, intelligence was pouring in, Hamas was uncovering rocket launchers, Hamas was preparing underground bunkers for its commanders, Hamas was preparing communication devices that could be used when crossing the border inside Israel. All of that was just not interpreted the right way. It wasn't that somebody decided that, he was spying or she was spying for Hamas, or there was a mole on the inside, although I know a lot of people want to believe in that because it just makes things easier to say, oh, somebody pressed a button on the inside and shut down systems. But it was deeper. And that's tougher to come to grasps with, is when we believe in something that's not real, because that's a crisis of faith. and you have to rebuild that trust now in our institutions, in our individuals who are charged with national security, and that's very difficult to do. So I think that the concepcia was something that became so prevalent and so widespread that everything that happened, it was looked at through that prism.
It's interesting that because I went to Kfar Aza quite recently, and two things struck me. One, that the proximity is ridiculous. I mean, you're literally across the road practically from Gaza. And the second thing that struck me was how many mini portable bomb shelters, or whatever they're called, little bomb shelters, there were all over the place. It was clear to the residents that they were being bombarded regularly with missiles. They were warning people that they're scared someone's going to breach the fence and come across. They were going to be attacked. I was also shocked that why is it that what is completely abnormal in the rest of the world was made normal in Israel? Why is it normal to have 15 seconds to run with your babies to a bomb shelter? Why is it normal to live in a world where it was accepted that this sort of violence against border communities was just part of living in Israel? Why was the abnormal made normal, in other words?
No, first of all, you're 100% right. I look back at that now, and part of me says that's the fault of the world, the double standard, the delegitimization of Israel. We're seeing it play out now at places like the United Nations and capitals around the world, including in Australia, unfortunately, where the prime minister has recognized now a Palestinian state and given a reward, tragically, I believe, to a terrorist group. So I could blame them, but I can't control them. Where I can maybe have some influence and control is over my destiny as a country and my country. And therefore, I also blame ourselves, Anna, because I think that Israel accepted this reality, right? We agreed to a reality in which Hamas could obtain rockets, Hezbollah could obtain rockets, and we would allow and watch that to happen, and we would not preempt and we would not act. Instead, what did we do? We built defensive measures. They created rockets. We created Iron Dome. Amazing, incredible. What a system. Wow. But what did Iron Dome do? It created a sense of security, which ended up being false. In 2014, and we detail this in the book, in 2014, when Hamas, during an operation known as Protective Edge during the summer, 51-day operation, Hamas started popping out of tunnels inside Israel, these cross-border attack tunnels. Israel realized it had to do something. So it launched a very limited incursion to destroy the tunnels along the border. But then afterwards, it set into motion a very intricate, complicated, and long process to develop two systems. One, an underground wall that would block tunnels. We called it the Iron Wall, like the Iron Dome. And number two was a detection system made up of sonar, seismic, geologists, you name it. All these different technologies came together, still classified, that could be in the field and could detect when a tunnel is being dug, where it's being dug, and even how is it being dug, with what tool. So we dealt with the tunnels, right? In other words, we dealt with the rockets, we dealt with the tunnels, we were impenetrable. But Anna, how many people crossed in on October 7th in a tunnel? 0, right? So all of that security that we felt gave us security was actually false. So I also, it's easy to blame Prime Minister Albanese or Starmer or Macron for their double standard, which ties and binds our hands. But I think it's mostly on us that we accepted this reality. And what we're doing now, we should have done much earlier.
I see that having spent months and months in Israel now, it sounds funny, but when the siren goes off, you kind of look around, you check your phone and you turn to a friend and go, is it a Houthi or is it from somewhere else? And if it's a Houthi, it's like, yeah, besedel, we might kind of stray into some stairwell or, we kind of don't really respond too much. It's the adaptation, our constant adaptation to these threats that seems to be the problem. We become blasé because we think that we've kind of gotten on top of the problem. Oh, it's just Houthi, we will intercept that. Do you think that that's part of the problem, that we keep kind of adapting and then becoming complacent?
I think you hit the nail on the head. And I wanted, you're 100% right. I mean, the Houthi missile just, if there's a siren here, I live in Jerusalem, and, they tend to fire those missiles also like in the middle of the night It's like, I'm not getting out of bed anymore. It's just a Houthi missile, right?
Exactly.
But we do see is what tragically does happen with that drone attack in Eilat, for example, when they're not intercepted. But I think what you are touching on is really the fundamental weakness of Israel, but also the fundamental strength of Israel. See, they go in hand. In other words, because of the constant military challenges, we could be looked at we could be excused as being a country that really is not able to do anything except hunker down, fight, have to defend ourselves, and live in a constant state of military conflict. But we're not like that, right? We have developed, we evolve. We're the most innovative country in the world. We're constantly creative and building and high tech and society. It's unbelievable. But I think that it's the weakness and the strength to some extent. When I look at it, I've come to think of Israel as being, a country that we view ourselves as a Western nation, right? We're a liberal democracy. Our trade, our cultural ties are with the West. It's with the European Union. It's with the United States. We consume U.S. media, Hollywood, film. We don't watch Bollywood or Chinese movies, right? Our ties culturally and economically are with the West, and we view ourselves as being part of the West. The problem is that we think we're Luxembourg, but our neighbors are not Germany and France and Belgium. Our neighbors are Hamas, Hezbollah, until recently the Assad regime, and off on the horizon, Iran, pulling the strings behind the curtain. And that means that you can't pretend you're Luxembourg in the Middle East. And that's where I think we lost the plot to some extent. We got too used to the good life. And we have to keep in mind that in the years leading up to October 7th, life here was really good. Yeah, there was the occasional clash. There was the occasional operation. There were enemies that were arming and amassing weapons, but the economy was taking off. 2023, before October, saw the greatest number of tourists ever in the state of Israel, over 3 million, right? I mean, this was a country that was on the rise, not in decline despite all these threats. So we were able to compartmentalize to some extent, but that was false. That wasn't reality.
Unfortunately not. And we've seen the consequences of mistakes in the Middle East come at a horrifically high price. I wanted to ask you about the mysterious roles of Qatar and Egypt. What can you tell us about their roles in aiding Hamas, and why have the U.S. government refused to put maximum pressure on Egypt to create a refugee camp of some sort in the Sinai and evacuate civilians to avoid what has become a mass tragedy in the Gaza Strip?
Yeah, I mean, look, definitely there is a tragedy in Gaza, and we have to recognize that what's happened there to the mostly civilian population is terrible. I believe that the responsibility rests on Hamas and the way that it fights, and of course, embeds itself in civilian infrastructure and the way it hides behind men, women, and children. But that doesn't take away from the fact that most of Gaza is devastated. So many people have been killed in this war. And Egypt has a 14-kilometer border. In other words, there's like this expectation that supplies and humanitarian aid needs to come in from Israel. There's an expectation that if people are to leave, they need to leave through Israel. There's a border crossing with Egypt. There's a border with Egypt. And Egypt has done nothing to assist the people of Gaza.
Why are we responsible in entirety for the humanitarian aid? What is the background to that? Where did this conceptia come from?
You're right. By the way, that's also a conceptia. I mean, it came from the fact that, look, up until 2005, Israel de facto, according to the international community, was the occupier of Gaza. We had settlements in Gaza. We had military forces in Gaza. In 2005, under the disengagement, 20 years ago, when we pulled out of the Gaza Strip and removed the community, the so-called settlers, and the military outposts, and we pulled back to the international recognized pre-1967 border, we did not cut civilian ties with Gaza. We continued to supply them. Now, that was a tragic mistake, I believe, because what it did, it made it seem as if we are the side that continues to maintain responsibility. What we should have done back then is severed all relations. Electricity, Egypt. Water, Egypt. Supplies, medicine, food, cars, electronics, Egypt. Take it from Egypt. We are a country that is attacked by this entity. Why would we supply it? But then the absurdity continued after October 7th. We are attacked in the greatest massacre of Jews since the Holocaust, 1,200 people murdered on a single day. And then right away, what does the world say to us? Yes, you have the right to act in self-defense. Go in there, go fight Hamas. But at the same time, give them food, give them fuel, give them supplies. I mean, does anyone imagine for a moment that after the 9/11 attacks on the United States, somebody would have said to George W. Bush, hold on a second. Yeah, you could go fight Al-Qaeda and Osama bin Laden, but make sure to give them supplies at the same time. Nobody would ever have thought to say that, right?
Why has this not been pushed back against? And why have the Egyptians, from what I understand, are the second largest recipient of American aid, foreign aid?
Military aid, yes.
Military aid. Why have they, you've got massive leverage there. What is going on from a humanitarian standpoint? Why are they given a pass to actually protect life and to do the correct thing from what I understand from international law? If you have a border where refugees are seeking to flee a conflict zone, they are actually obliged to open that gate. So why have they been allowed? And nobody talks about it, and everyone pretends that there's only one border with Gaza.
By the way, I mean, even when they do allow people across the border, and this has been well documented all over the international media, that you have to pay something like $2,500 or $5,000 to get across the border per person. Now, we all know that's a fortune for the average person. No one has that money in Gaza, very few. So you're basically, even if you're saying
that money.
Right, Hamas does, right, but the average Palestinian doesn't. So you're even saying, okay, yeah, maybe we'll let you in, but you have to pay. Look, you're 100% right. I've asked this question of U.S. officials numerous times. I've wondered why they don't use the leverage that they have with the military aid that Egypt does receive to put more pressure on Cairo and on the President Sisi to do more to allow in the people of Gaza and to do more to allow in supplies into Gaza. It's complicated. And the answer is that on the one hand, Israel would like to see that happen. On the other hand, Israel is very concerned that Egypt, and they're already seeing what Egypt is doing, amassing those military forces on the border with Gaza, is that Egypt is potentially going to sever and cut off ties with Israel and annul potentially the Camp David Accords, the peace treaty that was signed back and reached in 1979, between Anwar Sadat and Menachem Begin. For Israel, peace with Egypt and quiet on the southern border, our largest border, it has to be said, is existential. Because if we now have an active front with Egypt, even if it's not a hot front, in other words, not active, but it is a tense situation where they have hostile intentions towards us, it would require resources, attention, and capabilities that right now we just don't have. And therefore, to be able to balance, on the one hand, push Egypt in that direction, but on the other hand, maintain a semblance of relations with Egypt is considered to be the price we have to pay. So we're willing to swallow this. And this is what the government in Jerusalem has decided. It's willing to swallow this bad pill as opposed to actually take Egypt to task. I can tell you that in the beginning of the war, just a few weeks after October 7th, there was work that was done in one of the ministries in Israel to start with policy papers that were drafted that they wanted to disseminate and start to get into the hands of policymakers all over the world to put the weight and the onus on the Egyptians. And in the end, they were shelved because of the concern of what this would do. And we're seeing how tense the situation already is. Is it the right decision? I don't know. Could we be using the Americans more effectively? I think we can. But one thing that is telling is the fact that President Sisi, let's remember, Egypt is a massive country, super strong military. President Sisi has yet to make a trip to Washington, D.C. or to the United States, right? He has yet to meet President Trump. There's a reason why. I think he does not want to be put into that corner and be asked those tough questions. And therefore, he's trying to stave off having to be there.
He's laying low.
Exactly.
So let's just pivot for a second to Qatar. We hear a lot about Qatar funding this, funding that. What is the truth here? What is their role? They seem to be, both the firemen and the arsonist, as they say. Well, what's going on?
The Qataris, again, it's complicated. And I know I keep on saying that in this conversation.
What's not complicated in this region?
But it's, yeah. I've always been envious, Anna, of people who are able to see things in black and white, because I have yet to find that superpower. But look, on the one hand, the Qataris are right. Israel asked them to send $30 million to Hamas every month back in 2018. And Qatar did that. It also got the sign off of the United States. The Qataris are also right that they were asked, maybe with a wink and a nod, by the Americans with the Israelis to allow Hamas leaders to reside in Doha as a place where there would be someone who could talk to them, in other words, the Qataris, and Israel and America could keep their eyes on them, knowing that they're in Doha, because they were moving around. They were in Iran, they were in Syria, they were in Lebanon, they were in Turkey at different points. But where Israel and the critics of Qatar are right is that the Qataris play a two-sided game. They provide that funding to Hamas and more. They provide sanctuary to Hamas and much more. And they also are working to coordinate with Hamas and at the same time trying to pretend that they are the negotiator in these talks. We've seen repeatedly over the last 2 years how when they really want to, they're able to put pressure on Hamas and get hostages released. We saw that with Idan Alexander most recently. Donald Trump said, I want this American-Israeli soldier released, and he was released, and there was no exchange even. We saw in the beginning of the war, there was a mother and a daughter of U.S. citizens from Chicago who were released just, 2 weeks into the war. They were released because the president then, it was Biden, insisted, and the Qataris got them released. They play this two-sided game. They have ties with Iran. They have ties with the Taliban. They set themselves up intentionally to be nice to everybody so that they are the only one that when there's something needed, people will come to them. I think much more pressure needs to be put on them. Much more pressure. The problem is that if I have to think of what is the one thing that Joe Biden and Donald Trump agree on, it's that Qatar is one of the greatest non-NATO strategic allies of the United States. They both say it. So when that's the reality, it's going to be hard to get the Americans to put more pressure on Qatar because they view them also as a strategic ally.
So Yaakov, you've had enormous experience in analyzing this mess. If you had a crystal ball, where do you see us in 5 or 10 years' time?
Very difficult to know. I mean, I want to believe that we will be in a better position and we'll be in a better situation. Because when I look at October 7th is a coin with two sides. One side of that coin is the book that we wrote, that Amir and I wrote while Israel slept, tells the tale of how this happened. How did we fall asleep? How did we fail repeatedly and find ourselves under attack in something that we never believed was possible? But the other side of October 7th, the book that still has to be written, not by me, by someone else,
By you.
is the re-engineering of the Middle East, is what has transpired in these 2 years since. And I have lots of criticism of the way the war has been managed, but we can blame Netanyahu for the failures that led to October 7th. But at the same time, if we're intellectually honest, we have to give him the credit for what has changed here. And the reality has changed. Hezbollah is decimated. There's a cabinet government in Lebanon today that has passed a resolution to disarm Hezbollah and collect the weapons. Syria, Assad has fallen, not directly due to Israel's actions, but as a consequence of the change in this region, the weakening of the Iranian axis. Iran had its nuclear facilities destroyed, its uranium enrichment facilities, in an attack that is of biblical proportion, in my opinion. Getting the Americans alongside the Israelis to blow up Fordow, Isfahan, Natanz. I mean, this is stuff that people never believed would be possible. Hamas itself, they are a shadow of what they were. They are degraded in a way that we probably never thought was possible. So have we changed reality? 100%. Now the question really is, and to your question of what will be in 5 or 10 years, can we take advantage of these opportunities that today exist here in the Middle East? So we've been fighting a war now for 2 years. And now I think we're at the point where we have to decide, okay, what are we going to do with the new reality? How are we going to propel it to a better future for us, first and foremost in Israel, but for the entire region, right? The Palestinians are still here. They're in the West Bank. They're in Gaza. Whether we like it or not, they're not going anywhere and we're not going anywhere. Do we not have an opportunity today to try to facilitate the establishment of a different entity in Gaza to govern them? maybe a new entity in the West Bank that's less radicalized, that's reformed, that changes the education system. I don't know, but there's so much opportunity today. And if we don't take advantage of these opportunities, then tragically, I think, where will we be in 5 years? Back to where we were on the eve of October 7th. And that's why, for all the pain that we've had, all the prices we've paid, people that we've lost, by the way, on both sides of this conflict, we have a responsibility to do better for the future. And therefore, of course, I think that Israel today has to have a sword always in one hand, always ready to fight, always vigilant. But the other hand has to be looking for those opportunities on the horizon. Otherwise, I'm afraid we will miss what could be game-changing opportunities.
On the crystal ball question, I mean, it's clear that the IDF's strategy, and no doubt hand in hand with the US, has been to clear great swathes of Gaza and to demolish. Is the destruction purely caused by military necessity, or is the destruction a strategy to create something completely new in the region?
I think it's a mix of both, to be honest. I think that let me say like this. I don't think Israel just wants to destroy buildings. I don't think Israel wants to kill people. God forbid, right? That's not the way we fight. That's not the way this military operates. But because of the nature of how Hamas exists and how it does use civilian infrastructure, sometimes there is no alternative. But the question is, what's going to come next here? And we do need, unless we're going to do it ourselves, and that seems to not be the popular approach or opinion, Israelis don't want to see a continued governance of the Israeli military, or presence for that matter, inside Gaza in a way that we're going to be in charge of sewage and education and picking up the trash of Gaza. We don't want to have to do that. We do need to pave the way and facilitate to some extent the establishment of a new governing entity in Gaza. Now, what is that entity? It's likely something that is Egyptian and Saudi and Emirati and maybe Jordanian with American support, but it needs to have a Palestinian figurehead.
Is there a candidate that you can think of putting his hand up for the cup, or her hand up?
There are a lot of potential candidates. I mean, the Palestinian Authority itself would love to be able to do it. There are problems, obviously, with the Palestinian Authority. They themselves are very flawed. But there are potential Palestinians who are in different roles in different places around the world that have been spoken about, from Muhammad Dahlan, a former Fatah strongman in Gaza who now resides in the UAE, to Salam Fayyad, the former Palestinian prime minister who now teaches at Princeton in the United States, and others. Do they have the strength and the support and the ability? I don't know, right? But we need to be creative here. And Israel also, I think, needs to have the courage to look to the future and to see what's potentially possible, right? It's hard, obviously. It's very hard. But for the future and for future generations, we do have to try to envision what can be different here. And we need an entity, by the way, that can achieve a couple of things. Let's not forget. Only one challenge is reconstruction. Another challenge is preventing Hamas from rebuilding, because no matter how much we fight, Hamas will still be there. So it has to have strength and power and capabilities. But challenge number 3 is also de-radicalizing the Gaza Strip. For too long, the people of Gaza have been radicalized to hate us, to want to kill us. We have to change that. Otherwise, this will all be futile. So this entity has a big, big mission that is not simple for anyone to undertake.
You mentioned that Hamas will be there. You said Hamas will always be there. So what does victory actually look like? When do we know that we've won?
Well, I think victory has a couple of layers to it. There's the military victory, which is when you've basically decided, or you've understood, that you've broken the back of their ability to attack you. And that pretty much has been achieved. And Hamas has been degraded sufficiently. By the way, if we take a comparison to Hezbollah in Lebanon, we declared victory there. Hezbollah is still in existence, still has more or greater capabilities than Hamas has. But because of how it's been weakened and deterred, and the establishment of a new government in Lebanon that is cracking down, together, that is seen as the victory. So it's a military layer and a political layer. The political layer is where we do not yet see any movement. And that's the big unknown. That's when you ask Israeli decision makers and policymakers, what is the so-called day after? They say, well, we can't talk about it. If we do, it will ruin the chances of it happening. I don't know much more to say on that because, like you and many other people, I ask and get the same answer from everyone. But I have ideas of what that looks like, what we just described before. This new entity supported by the Arab world, supported by the Americans, lots of funding for reconstruction. It will need to be robust because if we think it's just reconstruction, policing, and that's it, that's not enough. The de-radicalization is the only way to get us back on track to a long-term solution here. We need a generational shift in Gaza. We need a people that do not believe in martyrdom, as they call it and see it. We need a people that don't want to kill us. And that requires a change to the education system, to cultural institutions, to news media companies. Everything has to be changed. And that's not going to happen overnight. That's going to take a long, long time. But that is, if we really want peace here in this region, it's existential.
That depends, of course, on the culture of the people and whether they want to embrace
100%.
this opportunity. Yep. It's unfortunately not all resting on our shoulders. And I hate to sound a bit skeptical, but it's a big ask to ask people who are being supported in the entire world to hate and to attack us. It's not like they're isolated and it's just a single ideology. This is a global movement that is intent on destroying us. I've noticed that there is a bizarre thing going on, and I don't know whether you're aware of this or whether you agree with this, but it seems that there's a kind of global fight going on. There seems to be a whole lot of lies being disseminated. And in the West, people are supposed to buy it whole, and they have been to a great extent. The lie about the genocide in Gaza, the lie of us being an apartheid state, the ridiculous idea that, this gays for Gaza kind of movement. So many things have been happening, it seems, within the last maybe month, that are waking people up to the fact that for some reason there seems to be, and I am no conspiracy theorist, let me tell you, I've never subscribed to a single conspiracy in my life, but something is going on here. Something's going on where the mainstream press, or there's an enormous wave of messaging that is completely based on fabrication. Do you see this, or am I imagining it? And what do you think's going on here? What's behind it?
I mean, it's a big question. I think that there's obviously, the world is in turmoil, and I think we all know that. It's a result of so many different factors. We could talk about social media. We could talk about populist politicians, very polarizing politicians in today's world. Look at Netanyahu, look at Trump. We could talk about the conflicts that continue to rage in two very important parts of the world, in Europe, Russia, Ukraine, and here in the Middle East, between Israel and Hamas, and of course with Iran and the Houthis and so much more. So all of that creates just great general unrest. Then there's the anti-immigration movement, and you see what's happening in the United States, and you see what's happening in Europe. And the way what used to be a certain decorum for conversations about politics has turned into, you're going to get shot on the streets of Utah like Charlie Kirk, or somewhere else around the world where politicians are shot randomly. And you have to, and I think we all sense that to some extent, because even around, as you mentioned, it's a new year and it's Rosh Hashanah. I mean, it was as we notice probably in our own homes, in our own holiday tables and meals, some of these conversations are difficult to have with even our closest loved ones, right? Was Joe Biden mentally fit? Was he not? Is Donald Trump good for Israel? Is he not? Do I like Bibi or do I not? Do I blame him for everything, or can I actually see that he did some good, right? It's very difficult today for people to see, I think, complexity and nuance in any of these big issues that we're dealing with. And let's also be honest that our politicians take advantage of that, and they push to us a narrative that is meant to blind us from the other side, but keep us fixated on the version that they want us to believe in, so that, we continue to support them. I think that the media plays a very important role here. Media is unfortunately often weaponized by whether it's the right or the left. Tragically, when I look at Israel, I mean, what's happened over the last 2 years, the lies and fabrications that have been disseminated by mainstream media of genocide and starvation and famine in Gaza are absurd, just complete lies. but they take hold, and the media washes its hands of any responsibility. I mean, how many examples do we need of yes, emaciated kids in Gaza who are plastered on the front pages of some of the most important newspapers in the world, but are kids who suffer from genetic diseases. And of course, it's tragic. And I don't want to say that there aren't people who are hungry in Gaza. Of course there are. I think that tragically, what we've seen is that there is a strong current and foundation of anti-Semitism today around the world that has just seeped in to media organizations, into the general public. I think that people have a difficulty, by the way, accepting and seeing that there is a country called Israel that is run by the Jewish people, that is able to stand on its own 2 feet, that is able to fight and defend itself. They want to see a Jew from another time. They want to see a Jew who cowers in a corner and who they step up to defend. And they don't like this Jew that they're seeing. They don't like it. They don't like, listen, this war is terrible, right? It is. By the way, I mean, we see what's happening to us, how we're being demonized and isolated around the world. It's why part of the reason for the Concepcia, part of the reason for why we kicked the can down the road, because we knew this would happen. But we are fighting, and we're doing work that is dirty and terrible, and war is terrible. But instead of the world standing by and saying, thank you for your patience, we understand why you waited, and now you, of course, have to get done what needs to get done. From the day we started, we've been told to stop. I mean, this double standard and this hypocrisy is just astounding and absurd. And I think that really, and this doesn't, by the way, saying it's anti-Semitic or partially anti-Semitic doesn't wash our hands of responsibility as well, right? We can always do better. But we also need to recognize that there's some things we're not going to be able to do. Some people we're not going to be able to convince, and some media that's always going to be against us. It's the facts of reality, and it's the price we pay. And by the way, Anna, it's been the Jewish story for thousands of years, unfortunately, right? Tragically, history does often repeat itself, especially when it comes to the hatred of the Jewish people. The upside of it all is that Israel is strong, and Israel is powerful, and Israel does have friends, and Israel does have supporters, and there are people who recognize the truth, and Israel is not capitulating, and Israel is not caving, and the people of Israel are resilient and strong and brave and courageous in ways that we never could have imagined. The youth of Israel stand up to fight and sacrifice themselves at a time that around the world, youth are busy posting on Instagram, and that's all they care about. I mean, there's so much positive and silver lining that you can find, unfortunately, even in these dark times, that give us so much hope. So we can hope for the future, but we can also recognize that it's going to be an uphill battle, and it will be.
I'm more optimistic than you are, because I think, and I might be wrong, maybe it's too much Instagram or something, but I think that the world is actually waking up to the threats that we face. I think that they are starting to understand that this is not just a Jewish problem. This is a threat to Judeo-Christian countries all over the world, the threats that are faced by anyone who values freedom of speech, who values a free society, who values democracy, who values women's rights, gay rights, and every other right, the things that we hold dear to us. I think the silent majority is waking up. So I will have to unfortunately end on that note. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining us and for talking to our community in Australia. And Yaakov, thank you so much for speaking to us, and Shana Tova.
Thank you, Anna. Shana Tova.